Finally tonight, history between Japan and China, and to Elizabeth Farnsworth in San Francisco.
President Jiang Zemin of China went to Japan last week in the first ever state visit to that country by a Chinese leader. Almost from the beginning, the past intervened. China wanted a written apology from the Japanese Prime Minister for his country's actions in China during the 1930s and during World War II. Prime Minister Abuchi did offer a verbal apology, but a written statement expressed deep remorse without apologizing. Officials from both sides played down the disagreement, but as he left Tokyo, Jiang Zemin urged the Japanese to reflect on the past as a way to strengthen ties between the two countries. Now we get two views on the role of history in relations between Asia's two most powerful nations. Kunihiko Saito is Japan's ambassador to the United States, and Iris Chang is author of The Rape of Nanking, The Forgotten Holocaust of World War II. Mr. Ambassador, from the point of view of the Japanese government, why was there an apology and why did it take the form it did?
Well, before answering that question, Mr. Farnsworth, let me say that President Jiang's visit to Japan was a success. Our two leaders agreed to work jointly to build a partnership of friendship and cooperation. And President Jiang himself said that his successful visit and the joint declaration issued signify that Japan-China relationship has entered into a new stage of development. Now, as to your question, the Prime Minister expressed feelings of deep remorse and offered apologies both to Korean President and President Jiang. And the ways or means to do so may have been different, but in substance there is no difference. He offered sincerely a sense of remorse and expressed sense of remorse and apologized.
Iris Chang, is that how you see it? Remorse and an apology both to Korea's president and to China's president, and both equally?
No, I'm afraid that's not how I see it. Japan had promised a written apology to China several weeks ago, and it was a surprise to many overseas Chinese people, as well as I'm sure the people of China, that a written apology was not offered when Jiang Zemin finally did visit Japan. And if it's true that that an apology for South Korea is the same as the apology for China, I don't understand why it couldn't have been put in the form of a written apology.
Why is a written apology so important?
Well, I think it would send a signal out to the international community as well as to China that the Japanese people are genuinely interested in coming to terms with their past. And the resistance to having a written apology, I think, just adds to the distrust that already exists between the two countries.
Mr. Ambassador, we should explain that the Korean president was in Japan, in October, and there was a written apology to Korea for Japanese actions during the time it had colonized South Korea. Why not a written apology in both cases if both cases are somewhat equal?
Well, as I said, in substance, I don't see any difference between these two treatments.
In other words, the verbal apology is just as important, that's what you're saying?
Oh, yes. And I wasn't aware that the Japanese government ever promised a written apology to the Chinese government. I wasn't aware that Chinese government demanded a written apology from the Japanese government. In fact, when the Prime Minister verbally said that he wished to express his deep sense of remorse and offered apologies, President Jiang said that he welcomed these good remarks. And I really don't see that our two governments had differences or views over this point.
So, Mr. Ambassador, do you think the press just made too much of this and that it's been not treated properly in the U.S. press?
To be frank, I think that is the case.
How do you respond to that?
Well, I have to say, in all honesty, that the Chinese people are in deep pain for the fact that they don't believe that a sincere, unequivocal and sincere apology has ever been made by Japan to China. And I think that the measure really of a true apology is not what a person or a government gives grudgingly under pressure. A measure of a true apology is what one person feels in his heart when he makes that apology.
Explain something, Ms. Chang. 50 years later, there have been various statements by Japanese leaders in 1972 and 1985 to China, expressing remorse, expressing apology. Why did this become such a huge issue at this moment, in this meeting, when Asia has an economic crisis, there are ecological issues, there are so many things between them? Why, at least in the press in this country, in the press in China, I looked at some of the press from China, it was a big issue there. Why is this happening?
Well, I think it's because the Japanese government had delivered an apology to the South Korean government, and a written apology, and the Chinese government had expected the same a few weeks ago. And I think that the reason why it became an issue was because that expectation was pretty much dashed during Jiang Zemin's visit, which was, I think, certainly a loss of a golden opportunity for Japan to properly show its repentance for the crimes committed by the Japanese Imperial Army across Asia. It's not something I think that's well known in this country that more than 19 million to 35 million Chinese people perished because of Japan's invasion of China, and also the fact that Japan had enslaved hundreds of thousands of women, Korean women and other Asian women, as sex slaves for their imperial army. And these war crimes have really left a deep and gaping psychic wound in China and also in other Asian countries.
Mr. Ambassador, how do you explain why this became, if not, in your view, truly a big issue at the meeting between the two leaders? An issue in the American press, an issue in the Chinese press. I know that, for example, I read in a translation of one Japanese newspaper article saying it became an issue because the Chinese government uses it to push for concessions from the Japanese in other areas. Is that a possible explanation?
Oh, I don't think so. In the first place, I don't think that that was a big issue between our two leaders. And there is completely false notion which seems to persist somehow that Japan has not apologized for its conduct before and during World War II. But in fact, we apologized on many occasions, including a joint communique issued in 1972 between China and Japan when we normalized relations with China. And in the most comprehensive way, Prime Minister Murayama stated in 1995 that Japan is aware of the sufferings and damages caused on the people of Asian countries, particularly Asian countries, and expressed his deep sense of remorse and offered sincere apologies. I don't really understand why some people in those countries refuse somehow to admit that Japan has recognized its responsibility and offered its apologies.
Iris Chang, you've been talking a lot and working with people who have survived the atrocities that were committed in Nanking during the war, which you document in your book. What do they say about this?
Well, most of them believe that Japan has just never given an apology that they find acceptable. And the fact that even now there's so much discussion about how to word the apology, whether the apology should be in writing, it really raises some doubts in the minds of many of the victims that Japan has really properly shown enough repentance for what happened.
What would be enough?
Well, I think what would be enough is first of all, for Japan to honestly acknowledge some of the basic facts of these kinds of atrocities, which many revisionists refuse to do, and definitely a written apology, reparations made to the victims, I think inclusion of Japan's wartime aggression in school textbooks in Japan. I think
so. It's not all about the past. It's about a desire that Japan incorporate this in the present, in their teachings?
In the present, so they could learn from the lessons of the past. And I think that people don't believe that Japan has properly apologized or atoned for what happened because these apologies don't come spontaneously and naturally. You see, I think that if people have a true desire to apologize, they would do so gladly and repeatedly. There wouldn't be all this parsing of words. And you see, what I'm curious to know is, can the ambassador himself say today on national TV live that he personally is profoundly sorry for the rape of Nanking and other war crimes against China and the Japanese responsibility for it?
Well, my guess is it's probably not what the ambassador's role is, but Mr. Ambassador,
yes,
I'll let you respond to that.
Well, we do recognize that the acts of cruelty and violence were committed by members of the Japanese military, and we are very sorry for that. And we understand that the memory of those who suffered will last long. And I personally think that this is a burden which the Japanese people will have to carry for a long time. As to the incident in Nanking, we do recognize that really unfortunate things happened. Acts of violence were committed by members of the Japanese military. And I'd like to point out that Japanese school textbooks mention, all of them, when I examined about 20 available textbooks, all of them mention this incident in Nanking. So it is, again, a completely false notion that the Japanese try to conceal the past history from the younger generation. Instead, we make conscious efforts to teach our younger generations about what happened before and during World War II.
We have time only for a brief response from you.
Well, that's not entirely correct because
but the apology.
The apology.
Did you hear an apology?
I don't know. Did you hear an apology? I didn't really hear the word apology that was made. And I think that if he had said genuinely, I personally am sorry for what the Japanese military had done during World War II, I would have considered that an apology. But I think that would have been a great step in the right direction. But again, there are words that are used such as words like regret, remorse, unfortunate things happen. It is because of these types of wording and the vagueness of these expressions that the Chinese people, I think, are infuriated.
Thank you both very much for being with us.
Well, just one more point.